Hey, this is Drew Baird from Moon Audio, and guess what? I've got my Mojo back. We're going to go over the brand new and very exciting new product from Chord, the Mojo 2. We've been waiting forever for this, and it's finally here. So let's jump right into some of the features and improvements that Chord has made with the new Mojo 2. So the first thing I noticed, and this is really important to me as a cable maker, I noticed these things right away. The 3.5 millimeter outputs for the headphone jack are much tighter. In other words, when you insert your 3.5 TRS, it grabs onto it big time. I did a comparison between it and the old Mojo, and the old Mojo was much looser. Now, granted, my original Mojo has had a ton of use, but still, I've got another Mojo that's a lot newer than this one, and it's still a little bit loose. So I'm really excited because as your connector spins in the jack, over time, you're gonna lose some of the plating on the connector. And that can cause a quick little bit of static in the sound. And with the new tighter connection, I think that's gonna eliminate that issue over time with, heavy use of your equipment. All right, so let's talk about the battery power improvements. So they've added a higher capacity battery to deal with the higher functioning processing that I'm going to get into in a little bit, so that we could maintain a good long period of charge. They've also added intelligent power to it, just like they did with the Hugo 2. So now when you charge it to 100%, plug it into your USB charger, you can leave it on all the time without worrying about overcharging the battery. And you don't have to worry about the battery continuously depleting, charging, and so forth. This can ruin your battery over time. So let me tell you how impressed I've been with the original Mojo battery. So this Mojo right here is the original Mojo I got when I was lucky enough to be invited to the Chord in October 2015, where they had the release party of the initial Mojo. This battery lasted for 7 years. I've just recently changed it about a month ago. Now, I'm not a power user in that this was used 24 hours every day for 7 years, but this unit was used a ton. Every audio show, all kinds of demos here at the shop, testing of cables. That's pretty impressive for a battery life to last 7 years. Am I saying that you're gonna get 7 years out of a battery? Not necessarily, but that's pretty impressive. So what did they change about the amp section of the Mojo? Not a whole lot. They've done most of the changes as far as the circuit in terms of the power supply. They've added better filtering. If you'll remember in the early days with the original Mojo, there were some issues, not really issues, but the filtering in the Mojo, when you used a cheap USB charger, you would sometimes getting some whining or hissing noise from the Mojo as it was charging. They obviously improved that later on with the original Mojo down the line, but now with the Mojo 2, they've gone an extra step and improved the power filtering further. So more on the amplification circuit, not a whole lot has changed in terms of the power output. It's pretty close if you look at the numbers. Where they have made some changes, they've gotten the noise floor down and they've increased the dynamic range a little bit. This means more resolution and more control. So the filter taps have been increased from 38,912 to 4960. Not a huge change in the tap count, but the filter core has been upgraded to today's standards. So let's talk about the brains of the Mojo 2. So they're using the same FPGA Intrex 7 chip. It was used in the original Mojo, some other Chord products, and that doesn't mean that things haven't changed in terms of sound quality. Think of that chip as a little mini supercomputer. It's not doing the D to A converter. After the Intrex 7, you go to flip-flops, discrete circuits. That's where the D to A conversion happens. But what the supercomputer or the Intrex 7 is doing essentially is it's carrying the incredible software that Rob Watts at Chord is constantly tweaking and playing around with to get the best sound for all of their products. So he's made a lot of improvements. He's added a bunch of features to it as well this time. This is part of the reason why the new battery and power supply improvements were so important. We needed to be able to enable the device to have the same playable time that the original Mojo had, but also be able to do all kinds of new features. We've added, not me, they've added crossfeed. they've added equalization, and Ricky's going to do a more in-depth dive into all of these features and all of the different filters. But suffice it to say, they've created 4 different EQ curves that you can play around with. 2 at the top end, 2 at the bottom end. And you can use this to tailor and shape the sound of your headphones. Why is this important? Well, one instance I was explaining to my crew here is when the original HD800 came out, it was revolutionary at the time. Super dynamic, super detailed, super analytical. But sometimes it can be a little too sterile because of those details. What I would have liked to have seen was a little short or a short 3 dB drop at a long distance on the frequency spectrum to smooth out the top end. Now, we added the Black Dragon headphone cable as a way to warm up the top end, but it doesn't change the frequency response. And as you'll see with Sennheiser, they came out later with the HD800S. And what they did was, with dampening and changing the enclosure, they smoothed out the top end. Well, if you still own the original HD800, one of the DSP equalization shape curves will help you smooth out that top end. So these are really cool. And like I said, Ricky will get into those and crossfeed a little bit more in his in-depth written review and his video review. What else is new? Something that's really huge and important to me, based on a lot of issues that we saw over time, is the addition of USB-C. And where they put that USB-C connection. It's actually at the bottom of the player. So when you connect your USB-C cable to it, like I will do so here, it sits flush on the table. Why is this important? Because you can't wobble the cable. The problem with the micro B connection, and this isn't a Chord issue, really this is a micro B issue. I've never been happy with that connector. I much prefer the mini B before it and the C now. Because when you had the geometries of those 2 connectors, the cable would not wobble. But with the micro B inserted into the Mojo, it's halfway up the side of the faceplate. Well, what happens if you hit that connector? Slowly over time, you expand that female socket and your connection becomes loose. You can also damage the locking tabs on the micro B. So this new implementation of the USB-C, where it sits flush on the ground, is huge to me. I think this is going to alleviate a lot of issues for a lot of people. So let's talk about the connections. So they now have 5 digital inputs. You saw the USB-C, we've got the old micro B, we've got the Toslink still, we still have the coax, but the coax is going to be a dual purpose coax. Not only is it a 2-pole single connection coax for, let's say, an iBasso player that has coax digital output, but it's also got a dual data connection. Why? For an M scaler. But are we going to spend $5,000 for an M scaler? Some of us are crazy to do it, but maybe my thinking is, will they be coming out with a portable M scaler? I don't know anything about it, I'm just speculating, but it makes sense to me. So, like the first Mojo, the poly still works. All the features and specs are identical. It fits perfectly on, same form factor, no differences. I'm assuming they're going to come out with a new case because obviously the buttons, and let's talk about the buttons, there are now 4 buttons instead of 3. They're a little bit smaller, obviously, to fit in the extra buttons. So we've got 1 button that's labeled M. That is the menu button for going through all kinds of different features like DSP, crossfeed. You also now have high and low gain. As you go through the volume control, the power button will change from one color to another to show that you've gone into either high or low gain. This makes it much better for a broader variety of sensitivity and impedance with headphones and iems. So it's also now got a locking feature on the buttons. So now you don't have to worry about when you've got the Poly and Mojo in your pocket and you're doing things on your phone and moving around that you don't accidentally change the volume. I've done this many a times. So that's a cool new feature that they've added. You can also change the brightness level of the coloring on each one of the balls. That's also another function on the M. You can also mute the device. Like before, we've got 2 headphone jacks. They haven't gone to balance. They're still single-ended. Make sure if you're going to use 2 pairs of headphones or 2 pairs of iems that the impedance and the sensitivity are very, very closely matched. If you're going to be running headphones that have different impedances and sensitivities, one could be very loud and one can be very low. Somebody may get an earache, so be very careful in that regards. Again, the Mojo 2, like the original Mojo, is not Apple MFI certified. Unfortunately, with Apple devices, you're still going to have to use the CCK cable. However, now we'll be using USB-A to USB-C to connection, so that way, again, it's flush on the table and you don't have to worry about breakage as much. The CCK is still the downfall. It's a cheap cable. You're going to have to buy a bunch of them. They break so easily. One day, hopefully, Apple will go to USB-C on all their devices. The good news is a lot of the new iPad Pros all have USB-C, so we can do without that. Going back to all the features that this unit can do with the DSP functions and the menu buttons, I can't get into all the different colorations and possible combinations. We are going to create a very comprehensive guide because I know it's impossible to remember what all the colors mean. And the bottom line is you're going to have to look on a guide to be able to figure out all the different levels of EQ, the crossfeeds. Over time, you'll remember what some of these colors are, but it's almost impossible to remember each one of these. So we are going to create a guide that will be very usable and readable on your iPhone, Android, or tablet so that you can take it with you on the go and check out what the different colors mean for the different features. So let's get down to the most important part. How does the Mojo 2 sound and how does it compare to the original one? I cannot say there is a huge difference, and I mean in the flat version of not using any EQ, not using any crossfeed. I did one comparison, just straight Mojo 2 in standard settings versus the original Mojo. I used the Focal Utopias. I know these headphones better than any headphone here. It's one of my all-time favorite headphones. I used my Black Dragon headphone cable with a 3.5, and I was able to essentially create a group in Roon with both the Mojo and the Mojo 2, and I can easily jack into both of them to tell the differences. What are the differences? The Mojo 2 has a meatier sound. It's sort of like looking at a thin, cheap can of Campbell's noodle soup and going to a Hardee's chunky soup. There's just a lot more to the music. There's a little more weight. One other change they did with the Mojo 2 over the Mojo 1, Rob got rid of the coupling capacitors. That added some bass to the bottom end weight, and I could hear that in the Mojo 2 over the Mojo 1. So it's got a meatier sound, a little more bottom weight. It's still got the good warmth of the original one. There is not a night and day difference, but what we're talking about, where all the improvements really are, is all the added features that they've done now with the crossfeed, with the EQ, with all kinds of DSP processing. This is much better and much more flexible than the original. Would I, if I still own the Mojo 1, get the Mojo 2? Without a doubt. I love this device and I'm going to be using it a ton. So I hope I've helped out a little bit with some of the early information and our views on the Mojo 2. Like I said, Ricky's going to do a really in-depth written review. He's going to come back and do a video review where he's going to play with a bunch of different iems and headphones. He's going to play with the crossfeed. He's going to play with the EQ settings, and he's going to give you all of his feedback on what he thinks about the Mojo 2 as well. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Stay tuned for lots of guides, lots of more information, lots of videos on the new Mojo 2. It's going to be priced at $725, we've been told. Hopefully that won't change. And we're not quite sure when exactly it's going to start shipping, but stay tuned. Sign up for our newsletter. Subscribe to our social media because we're going to be posting all kinds of stuff on it. Take care.